Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines and take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It is the 5th of January, 2024. Let's dive in. So, if you've been following the news recently, you've seen that America is currently trying to support a war in Ukraine with Russia. We are trying to support a war in Gaza with our allies in Israel. And we're trying to be ready to have a showdown with China in the Taiwan Straits if they ever try to take over Taiwan by force. And a fun thing that we're starting to see is that we are running out of ammo. Ukraine has been using more artillery in a month than we're used to producing in a year, and our stockpiles are dwindling rapidly. How rapidly? Well, no one's talking about that out there in open source media, and for good reason. But the point is, we seem to have a problem with ramping up production of critical military hardware in times of need. Now, right now, it's to support critical allies. We should feel lucky that it's not to protect our actual borders. So why is this? Why is a nation that was able to ramp up production to previously unseen levels in World War II in short order struggling to increase its output of ammunition and hardware for military purposes several years into persistent conflicts that we've been supporting? What does that say about our ability to respond to a true crisis or to put ourselves on war footing if we had to square off with another great power directly? Yikes. So we're going to look at that today. We're going to look at why America is struggling to produce basic military hardware and ammunition. And to help us with that, we're going to speak to a wonderful journalist named Matt Stoller. Some of you may have seen him out there on the Breaking Points program, which you can find on YouTube and Spotify. Shout out to Crystal and Sagar. He wrote a great piece back in October called Why America is Out of Ammunition, where he looks at how a series of mergers and acquisitions in the defense industrial base, going back all the way to the 90s, with bipartisan support, has put us into a position where our defense industrial base, the companies that actually produce the stuff our warfighters use, have become incredibly unresponsive to the needs of our actual national security establishment. Well, Matt, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. Happy to have you here. How you doing today?
Good.
So you recently wrote an interesting article back in October discussing how consolidation in the defense industrial base, particularly with mergers and acquisitions, have put us in a position where we're struggling to purchase enough weapons to support our current national security objectives, which include supporting a war in Israel and Gaza, supporting a war in Ukraine, and being on the right footing to deter a war in Taiwan should one break out with China. It's a great article called Why America's Out of Ammunition. It's going to be in the show description, but perhaps you could walk us through what you found in your research looking into this.
Yeah, it's part of a sort of a set of articles I've been writing since 2019 that are about a strategic choice that the country made in the 1990s after the end of the Cold War that involved two things. So Cold War has ended. We've had, 50 years of spending on this Cold War, go back even earlier to World War II, and you have this big industrial base, defense industrial base. What do you do with it? And you could get rid of it, which we've done at various points in our history, demobilize. But the defense contractors they went to the White House and they said, okay, we'll let you cut spending or keep spending flat, but we want higher margins. And so the Clinton White House, with support from the Republicans, said, all right, we will reduce spending or keep spending flat, and defense spending was relatively flat during the 90s. But we'll let you raise margins in two ways. One, merge. So, there was a huge merger wave that was actually financed by the Pentagon. The Pentagon paid the merger costs, and we had about 100 prime contractors in 1992. By 1999, we had 5, right? And you can name them, Boeing, Raytheon, et cetera, et cetera.
Lockheed, yeah.
And Yeah. That's when like Northrop Grumman. There used to be a Northrop and there used to be a Grumman.
Hmm.
Right. Right. So that's one thing. And when you have fewer bidders for a project, then prices go up. Right. The other thing
Yeah.
is there was an extensive um, set of regulations and rules, as well as a large Pentagon procurement apparatus. Is still fairly large, but it was much bigger, where you had a lot of people who knew how weapons were built in the government and kept a tight lid on prices and had a lot of bargaining power and had a lot of authority to bargain with defense contractors. The government often kept the intellectual property. Why not? It's government money paying for it.
Hmm.
And they got rid of a lot of that, right? And through changes in various procurement rules, this was known as reinventing government, right?
Okay.
That was a slogan in the 1990s. There was some thinkers who put that together. But both of these choices to consolidate and to change procurement rules to essentially let the big prime contractors run everything were a post-Cold War decision. And some of the rules they got rid of were things like, you don't have to build all the components of your weapon systems in America anymore, right?
Okay.
And, we saw significant problems. Like a lot of our defense contractors had factories in Mexico, which you wouldn't think is a big deal, except during COVID, the Mexican government just sort of shut the factories down and our contractors couldn't do anything about it. So there were lots of national security problems that have creeped up, like a lot of Chinese components in our weapons, not knowing where stuff is made. Also, just like pricing problems and then no bargaining power. So, hey, we need you to build more ammunition, rocket engines, whatever it is. And if there's one company that does it, and there's often just one company that does whatever the Pentagon wants, that company can say, I don't feel like it. Or,
Yeah.
oh, you want to spend 10 times as much to get 10 times as many? We'll raise the price by 10 times. And you get the same amount, or maybe slightly more, and we'll just increase our margins substantially. So just to give you a frame of reference, during World War II, for every major weapon system, there were at least a dozen contractors.
Hmm.
And even that continued even in Vietnam and for, it was like 5 or 6 contractors. There was a lot of pricing power beyond just, rules and regulations. It was also like, okay, I'm sick of dealing with you. I'm going to go to this other guy. I don't want to deal with Northrop. Grumman's doing a good job. We're going to go to them. And then after the consolidation, the Pentagon, just became a price taker, and also, the sort of ideology of like in the rest of society, it was allowed to be fail firms emerge, offshore all our factories, like one world,
Globalized
ready or not,
world, peace, dividend. We're all on
right?
the same page
Exercise
together.
olive tree.
So
Right. America
yeah.
as hyperpower. So, like, what does it matter where we make our weapons? We're never going to be in a war. Like, the idea that China challenges us, like,
Hmm.
that's ridiculous, right? That, like, super arrogance was,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
part
like the
of,
capitalist peace theory. If we all trade together, we're never going to fight
yeah.
together.
Yeah, no one with the McDonald's ever, two countries with McDonald's would never fight a war. That was the Thomas Friedman,
Yeah.
thing. And the Pentagon really oriented itself around that and is still oriented around it in most ways. And now all of a sudden you have a couple of things happen. There was the financial crisis of too big to fail banks, and most of our policy elites and like the boomers like kind of shrugged their shoulders, and they were like, oh, that seems bad. Like, we're ostensibly a free market system where we if you're a private entity, you have to rely on yourself. If you go out of business, you go out of business. Then all of a sudden they all got bailouts, and they were like, well, that's awkward, but we'll pretend that didn't happen. Right. And that was by and large the response to the financial crisis. Although younger people noticed it and were like, that seems messed up. Um, and then you had a number of you had the opioid crisis, and lifespan started declining around 2015. Then Trump happened, and there's all of a sudden these shocks to the political system. And then COVID happens, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of shortages. People are like, wait a
Yeah.
second, that seems like a problem. And again, because the boomers are still in charge, you're I don't see a lot of discussion about how to fix shortages now, right? We're just sort of
Yeah.
pretending that that's not like an issue. Um, and shortages are a result of monopolization, right? So the Pentagon, and then, the rise of China, like we just sort of offshored a bunch of stuff to China and it was like
Mhm.
low wage. Now China's not a low wage country anymore and is powerful. And so what we're seeing is a return to a world where there's more geopolitical rivals of the US and we need a defense base again. Okay.
Mhm.
But we have a Pentagon and a governing system and defense contractors that are oriented for a world of of finance. All they know is finance, right? So the piece I wrote was about a Pentagon, and there are people in the Pentagon who know this, and they keep coming out with reports saying, "Hey, this seems like a problem that we can't like build any weapons." And they say it in various ways. And the piece that I wrote was a report on mergers, right? Because the Pentagon, used to track this stuff very carefully. They don't anymore. And this report came out and said, hey, we should probably know who owns our defense contractors. And when a private equity firm flips some
Yeah.
vital contractor to some other private equity firm, we should probably know that, especially when it's financed by China. We don't. They were like, we have two guys maybe who are tracking this, and they don't really track it. We don't really track this stuff anymore. And we
Mhm.
don't actually have a framework for talking to the rest of the government that's supposed to look at mergers about whether that's a problem in national security. We just don't pay attention to it. And so, you have the roll up. This happened a few years ago, where I believe Lockheed bought Orbital ATK, and or was it Raytheon? I think it was Lockheed. Let's see that Orbital. I always forget this. Oh, Northrop. I think it was Northrop, right? So Northrop
Yeah.
bought Orbital ATK. Orbital ATK was one of the last remaining rocket engine producers. And so Northrop essentially became a monopolist over the nuclear triad.
Mhm.
And so Boeing, because they had to buy rocket engines from Northrop in order to make nuclear missiles, there was the Pentagon put out a request for proposal on upgrading the nuclear triad, which, it's $100 billion, $200 billion project. And they got one bid. They got Northrop made that bid. And Northrop had said, don't worry, we're not going to discriminate on when we buy Orbital ATK to make these rocket engines. We'll keep selling them to rivals like Boeing,
Yeah.
at a comparable cost. And then they didn't. And then Boeing publicly said, we're not going to bid on the nuclear triad upgrade because we can't get engines from Northrop at a reasonable price. And so now the government has one bidder for the nuclear triad, which is really bad, not just because it's going to be a lot more expensive, but because the quality will probably not be as good. And one thing you really want with nuclear weapons is high quality weapons that don't malfunction, right?
Yeah,
So this is
malfunctions in that are typically bad.
it's a really bad thing, right?
Yeah. I
Um,
think we all
so,
agree on that.
yeah, we can all agree, right? So
Yeah.
and then like the big guys, you can when one big guy wants to sell itself to another, but like there's tens of thousands of smaller firms, and they're often buying and selling each other. A lot of it finest, lots of contractors and subcontractors. And
Yeah.
what I think a number of these reports, and I write one of these issues, like, because Pentagon comes out with reports periodically and I read them. It's like, okay, the contractors, one of the things they've done is they focus on share buybacks now.
Mhm.
And the cash flow management practices of the Pentagon facilitate that. The government, when a prime contractor, everything they do, literally everything they do, is paid for by the government. They want to build a new factory, paid for by the government. Want to do R&D, paid for by the government. They get the IP, they get to control the factory, maybe even own it, but it's paid for by the government. And what they do is they try to get cash flow really quickly from the government, and then hold that cash for as long as possible and not pay subcontractors, and essentially reward shareholders. And that's like one of the things that really destroys our defense base, because the people that actually do the work don't get cash. What you have is
Yeah.
essentially like those five defense contractors are essentially just middlemen at this point. And
Mhm.
so that was another piece that I wrote. And what you've seen is like R&D is declining and share buybacks are going up. And it's like it's all paid for by the government. So there's no reason why R&D should be declining, because not only is it paid for, but like the government gives them a guaranteed profit of like 8% or something like that. So like the whole thing is just totally nuts the way that we organize this. And it's like it's so boomer. And you talk
That's a great
like
way to
you just talk
describe
to
it.
people. It's like you talk to people in the Pentagon, and it's like if the general is a boomer, they don't understand or they don't care.
Yeah.
If they're like younger, they're like, yeah, this is a big problem. That's how it goes, because that's in every part of our society. It's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
And so anyway, this last piece. So the last piece I wrote was about how like no one's tracking any of this stuff, and there is no Pentagon policy on M&A. Now, what did happen last week, or maybe, yeah, I think it was last week, and I wrote this up, is that Congress actually put something in the National Defense Authorizing Act that says that when companies want to merge, when there's an acquisition of over $100 million, there's all sorts of information that they have to give to the antitrust agencies, like who are our minority investors? What's the rationale for this merger? Like, what are our subsidiaries? Look at like labor markets. Are there any government contracts? And so like all the stuff that you look at as an antitrust enforcer, they now have to give that to the Pentagon. So the Pentagon is now going to get a ton of information about M&A in our society, and if they want to, they can actually like start to understand who owns and who controls the defense base. So the Congress actually did something useful there.
It's where it happens.
I mean, look, people shit on Congress a lot, but like Congress is. I'm a fan of Congress. I think generally speaking, like you want more power in the hands of our democratic institutions, and Congress is one of the more democratic institutions, because when everybody disrespects Congress, like power then just flows to CEOs, judges, the like bureaucrats in the executive branch, and like they are way worse than Congress, and they are not accountable at all. So like congressmen have to go back and they have voters yell at them, and that's way better than a judge who sits there and like in a robe and then gets to like go to like fancy like American Bar Association events and has like a lifetime job. Like I very much prefer the like weirdo that gets yelled at in the supermarket, right? Like that would be a better way to do it. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, of explaining the political situation that we're in and why. Well, anyway, so like, yeah. So what we need, one of the things that's happened is this Ukraine war. How long has it been going on? 18 months, something like that? 20 months?
Yeah. Since Russia reinvaded. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would think, okay, yeah, sure. It's going to take some time to rebuild the defense base, even if it's not consolidated, right? You you got cold production lines for Stinger missiles, which we haven't needed since the 80s, and so on and so forth. It's going to take some time. But after 20 months, we should be like producing a lot. Like we should be able to roll stuff up after 20 months. You can build
a new factory in its entirety in that amount of time if you want to.
There's a lot you can do. I mean, like you can. How long was like World War II? As we got in like 42. I mean, it's
we were there for 4 years. It started 2 years prior to us getting involved, and Arsenal of Democracy was rolling off the assembly lines before before Pearl Harbor. We were bankrolling the entire war.
Yeah, we started. I mean, the rearmament really started in like 38, 39. And it got going, in 40, 41. We should really be at a very high production level now if we had given the abilities that we should have in this country. The fact that we can't do that and that Russia can and China can is really worrisome. It's not that we weren't prepared for it. It's that we've had time. And now Israel is in this situation. Whatever you think about the conflict and whether we should be supporting Israel, we should have the capacity to support Israel if we want to, and we should have the capacity to support Taiwan. And Taiwan is still waiting for weapons systems it ordered years ago, and it is ordering weapons systems, and we're like, oh, you'll get it in 2028, 29, 30. And that's just like, it's like, okay, well, I guess our adversaries are going to wait on our procurement timeline. And also like the level of like sloth is just kind of crazy, where like there was some army official who's like in charge of getting a new Stinger missile. And he's like, yeah, we're going to put out a competition, we're gonna have these two companies, and they're each gonna develop a new Stinger missile, which I think is good. That's a good way to do it. You have some competition. He's like, they'll do like, demos in like 5 years, and then maybe we
Yep.
can get some production going. And you're like, what the fuck, man? Like, what the fuck? This is crazy. You need some sense of urgency. And it's like the reason that Army official's doing it is because he gets rotated in 3 years. So it's
Yep.
like it's not his problem, right? And what you need is like we need like a wholesale restructuring of how. Like I just think we should get back to firing generals again. I mean, like
There's the great book called The Generals, where they talk about the practice from World War II was that generals would get fired very quickly, but they almost always got a second chance. So
yeah,
put a general in place, fire him after 4 months, rehabilitate him. It wasn't a career killer, so early relief wasn't a problem, but it helped set the tone for the entire organization. It was one of the most successful policies that Marshall put into place.
yeah, and then we changed that and said, okay, we're going to have people rotate after a few
Yeah.
years, which I think it was really destructive, right? Because you want to give people a project and
Mhm.
tell them do the project, and when you're done, you either get relieved or you finish it, and then you do
Yeah.
something else. But the way we've done it now is we're like, okay, you have 3 years, so you have to manage this or 2 years or whatever it is,
Mhm.
and then you get rotated out. So the idea, like, people don't have to finish anything.
You're not responsible for the consequences of your own actions.
Yeah, no, it's really bad. I mean, I was like, when McChrystal got fired for like shit talking Obama, I was like, there are many reasons to fire McChrystal, and there were many reasons to fire the people who were involved in Afghanistan, but like,
Mhm.
that's the most lame reason to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
it was. It's great that the Pentagon's going to get all this information now, but what can they actually do with it to make this better? What are their options once they at least have visibility on it? Do they have any authorities and permissions? Like, what can they do?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do in terms of procurement. It just negotiate, like one of the common tactics that some companies use is they'll say, the Pentagon will put out a request for, they'll say we need this component or this part, and they'll get 5 bids, and then as it turns out, they're only getting one bid, but it's all coming, it's one company that makes it, and then 4 distributors who are
Yeah.
all like, and so now they'll be able to see that, right? Or they could be able to see that if there's like a lot of M&A. They'll be able to see, particularly problematic buyers of or sellers of weapon systems. Like there's a company called TransDigm, which is particularly bad. When TransDigm buys something, the Pentagon will be able to see that, and they'll be able to actually tell their procurement officers who are in that area, just, look out for price increases here. But more importantly, they'll be able to stop some of this stuff. So they'll be able to go like to the antitrust agencies, and they'll say, look, there are competition issues with all sorts of different purchases here, there, this other area, and based on the information that they're getting, and judges really care about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
When when an antitrust enforcer goes to a judge and says, I don't like this merger, it's a bad merger, it'll raise prices, the judge will look at the antitrust enforcer and be like, I don't know, man, the CEO seems pretty compelling. He's got a nice suit on. I trust that guy. You're just a government person. Why do I care about you? Like, that's the way most judges look at things, because judges are by and large naive.
Wrinkled slacks and a poorly fitted sports coat and a crinkled tie.
Yeah, I mean, judges are boomers, right? In most cases, and they're just like, but CEOs know what they're doing, right? Like
they came from the free market. If they've made it this far, it's based on merit. We should trust them.
Exactly. And it's sort of changing a little bit, but that's like where they are. But they also trust, a person with like stripes on their uniform, and so they're like, well, oh my God, a CEO is saying it, but then the guy with stripes is saying the opposite. What do I do? Right? That'll be the change, and that's a good thing, right? In World War One, Bernal Baruch, who was an investment banker, but he was running Woodrow Wilson's like procurement policy. He had an encounter with the head of U.S. Steel, and the CEO of U.S. Steel said, basically, how dare you try to get lower prices? If I don't run this company, like, what are you going to do? And Bernal Baruch was like, well, I'll just put a second lieutenant in charge. And it was like hilarious because this guy's from, well, he's like, I know you're like not anything special. Like anyone can do your job, right? And I think that's that's the attitude we have to get back into the
Hmm.
military, because I think there's too many people in the military who like look up to people in corporate America as like as if they know what they're doing, and like
Yeah.
everybody looks at everybody else as if they know what they're doing because they know they don't know what they're doing, but
Uh-huh.
it's like ridiculous.
Well, the military is so bureaucratic and so painful to try to get anything done sometimes. I had an experience trying to get mission critical equipment for soldiers I was in charge of in Afghanistan, and there was no meaningful way to do it, and it was all contracting disputes. And we ended up deploying without it, doing the entire rotation without it, coming home, and it was still on back order, even though it was physically sitting in a warehouse. We could go drive and pick it up, but because of the way the contract was written, there was one widget in the order that wasn't there yet, so we couldn't go get it. So when you live in that world, this idea of the civilian sector, where they're all very efficient and it's all very nice and proper, and they can just do whatever they want, and they're super agile and adaptive, and they're responding to the market. It's the grass is always greener on the other side. And it was interesting because now that I've made the flip, I'm looking at the graph from the other side, and it's not any greener. They just have better lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And the other thing is that like they're not actually different sides of the aisle, because the contracting disputes exist because the dominant corporate firms insist on
Mm-hmm.
the contracting disputes to exist. So government Pentagon bureaucracy is not a result of just like, oh, it's just this intractable government thing. Part of it is that, but part of it is, the five primes like love that system, right? So do a lot of the subcontract. I mean, they love that system because they want to have, they want to get paid, and they don't care if the item is sitting in the warehouse, because the cash flow, they get the cash flow regardless, right?
Yeah.
So like one of the reasons you don't have inventory sitting in the private sector is because you lose money if it's sitting there. I don't mean to like valorize the private sector, but I'm saying like if the government is paying you regardless of whether the stuff gets delivered or not, that's a very
Mm-hmm.
bad incentive model. And the problem isn't government stupidity. The issue there is you have private companies that use their political power to force the government to do those stupid things. And
Yeah.
that's frankly un-American. I mean, we have to start recognizing that the I mean, a lot of people, I'm worried about China, but not really because China itself can do that much damage to us. They can, but because we can't seem to address our internal enemies, right? And
Yeah.
they like these Wall Street guys, private equity guys, the defense contractor CEOs are just so much more like if they are China's biggest allies. And it's like it's a huge problem, and it doesn't make intuitive sense to most people in these policy making situations to be like the guy who's making weapons for us is actually the best friend of China, even if they
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily realize it. But that's the situation that we're in. Like this is, you know, treason is a strong word, but like Xi
Yeah.
Jinping came to San Francisco a couple of weeks ago and gave a speech, standing ovation. It was the head of every private equity firm, big
Yep.
tech firms, like,
They even cleaned up the city for him.
well, there we. I mean, the head of
Yeah.
Raytheon was like, "There's no way we can disentangle from China. We're too ingrained, and like that's not possible." It's like, wait, so if we get into a war with China, what are we going to get their permission to
Yeah.
like get new ammunition? Like, what is this? This is insane. Like the head of Raytheon is saying, "Well, we can't disentangle from China." It's
Hmm.
Raytheon.
So yeah, there's an interesting corollary here, where especially with China entanglement, if you look at telecom and Huawei, we were able to effectively stand up and ban them from our entire telecom supply chain. You can debate how effective the implementations have been, but at least politicians actually moved to get that done. What are the odds that we see something like that in the defense sector? Or what are the odds that the president can actually stand up and use like the Defense Production Act in its latest glory, where they can really just do loans and not much else, and actually force these companies to be more responsive to the actual needs of the warfighter?
Well, you need Congress to start getting involved. I mean, that's the reality here is like, in the 30s before the arsenal of democracy, like you had, Harry Truman, um, I guess this one before, but you had a whole bunch of investigations in I wrote a book called Goliath on the 100-year war between monopoly power and democracy. And one of the important elements uh, you as you put it, having the lights on, is a lot of investigation, especially from Congress. And that's what we need. If you want to force changes here, you have to have people in that run that like are in charge, and that is Congress actually starting to shine a light and to get more aggressive. And right now, the way it works is, and I used to work in Congress as a staffer, it's like if you go to the armed services committees, it's all, it's people who are often detailed from the services working there, but they're just it's so much like, well, this thing that you think needs to be done from, the guy you work for who was elected, the Pentagon doesn't want that, so we can't do it. And it's like, that's the way that these committees work, is they're just sort of like, they feel like they work for the Pentagon, not the other way around, which I'm sure if you're in the Pentagon, you probably think you work for Congress and not the other way around. But it's a very weird dynamic where I think since John McCain, there hasn't been somebody who's just like who's like confident enough and aggressive enough to like drive reform against, the sort of the defense contractor and bureaucracy's wishes. And I'm not saying John McCain was good or anything. I'm just saying like he had some strength and understood like certain elements of truth about war fighting that others didn't.
Yeah. All of us in the Army were very happy when he, called the Air Force up there in front of Congress and basically grilled them on, why are you getting rid of the A-10? And it's like, well, the F-35 can do it. And everyone in the Army is like, no, it can't. I've used both. I'm telling you, they're not the same platform. And he said, find me a ground force commander in the Army who's willing to sign off on that. Go find him.
I know. I don't know.
Thank you, somebody. Thank you.
I don't know anything about weapon systems, right? Like I don't know anything about fighting. I don't know anything about this, but like there's common sense. Like the A-10 was built to take fire and to shoot back at ground forces, and the F-35 was built. Who knows why it was built?
That's a complicated question.
It wasn't built for that. We just know that. Yeah. Like the other thing is, we know that the A-10 worked really well in the first Gulf War.
Yeah,
like it worked really well.
And we're going to Afghanistan and Iraq too. Like,
I mean,
the one argument from the Air Force that made sense to me was when they said, well, the A-10 is overbuilt for what it's currently being used for in the counterinsurgency fight, and it's not the right airplane for what we're anticipating a great power competition. It's like, okay, fair enough. Then they said, well, let's do a lighter attack airframe, prop plane, some heavy machine guns, some rockets. It'll be cheaper to maintain, cheaper to operate, smaller airfields. You actually get it in more places, better loiter time, and it'll be like a watered down A-10 for the counterinsurgency low intensity fight. And then we'll spend the rest of the money on all these F-35s, F-22s, and all that stuff. And then as soon as they got through testing of that program, they canked it and just killed it while they're still trying to get rid of the A-10 and just poured all that money back into F-35s. It's like the one non-disingenuous part of the argument that you had just collapsed.
Yeah, because the Air Force just doesn't want the A-10. I think that's they just hate it. And I think you're going to see the same problem where, you have, like, everybody knows the future of war is in cheap, autonomous weapon systems, just cheap stuff that you can mass produce that has standardized tech, and that's what China specializes in. That's what, like, Iran can make this stuff, Turkey can make this stuff. And we can make it, but the price has many, many zeros on it. And it's like a bureaucracy. We need to be making a lot of it, and it needs to be cheap. And that, I think, right now our bureaucracies are like really hostile to that idea, even if they say they understand that we need to do that.
Yeah, well, understanding it and actualizing it are two very different things, especially when you have constant rotation of people in and out of positions in the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah. And especially when the boomers are just never gonna. They're just never.
Is this our reality until all the boomers like retire or die? Like, is there really any chance that we fix this before then, or are we just running out the clock?
I think we could fix it. I I don't have a good answer to you. I would look, I didn't predict Trump, so who knows? Like
Hmm.
you could see a political like I didn't think that Biden would do what he's done. He's done a lot of really interesting things and some good things, some bad things. So I think that we're kind of like I when COVID happened, we had I actually did predict shortages in February of 2020, like right before COVID hit. I was like, we're fucked and we're going to have shortages. Um, you see learning, right? Like you see learning happening, and um, you could have a number of I think what's more likely before the boomers, sort of die off. I think it was more likely is some sort of crisis that's going to accelerate a phase shift. And that the crisis could be, there's many ways to have a crisis. Hopefully we learn and we fix this stuff before there's a crisis. I think we are fixing some of it. I mean, there's some of the semiconductor stuff is useful. Some of the industrial policy is useful. So the Trump tariffs are useful. Like there's a bunch of stuff. Like the reason I write about policy is because I think a lot of the problem is just a lack of public knowledge.
Hmm.
And so, when people know about this stuff, like I wrote about that report saying they couldn't find any mergers, and I think that had a little bit of impact on Congress. And so I feel like if there's more people that are making these arguments, especially people who are in the military and who understand the problems, like you're talking about, like, you couldn't get the equipment over for years. That's useful. This is useful, right? And I think there are younger people from the military who are now in Congress who are starting to understand, who are learning the legal levers. So I'm not necessarily pessimistic, but it's also possible that we will have another crisis. And hopefully after the next crisis, um, there will be enough knowledge that we can draw the right lessons from it. Like after the financial crisis, the lessons we drew were monopolize, bail out, and fuck everyone over who's a normal person or does anything for a living, right?
Yeah.
After Trump, I think the lesson from, and I'm on the left, so I'll just talk about the Democrats. The lesson from
Hmm.
Democrats was split. Some people were like, we need a new economic framework, which is correct. And some people were like, they went crazy. And I won't get into, but they were just like, we're headed towards fascism and all sorts of weird social ideas, which I thought was dumb. And so there was a split in the party. And I think Biden represents both factions, which is why there's a kind of schizophrenia to the administration. Um, when
That's a good
COVID
way of
happened,
describing it.
when COVID happened, we didn't, there were bailouts, right? So that the bailouts happened. But unlike after the financial crisis, where people pretended to help small business but didn't, the bailouts during COVID did help small business. The Paycheck Protection Program helped 7 or 8 million small businesses stay alive.
Hmm.
Got loans that turned into grants to keep payroll going. There was a ton of fraud, but we knew there was going to be fraud. It's just like, okay, we don't have the institutions set up, so we'll just throw money out the door, which was the right decision. The unemployment insurance, a lot of the stuff that we did for normal, we did stuff for normal people. It wasn't all perfect, but you didn't see, the economy basically shut down, and you didn't see starvation, right? You didn't
Yeah.
see like everybody kind of got a bailout, not just like Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan. So we learned, right? And then we didn't learn, however, to fix the supply chain stuff. There was some move to do some supply chain stuff in a very like Defense Production Act is like you're talking about because you know about it because of the Pentagon, but like people broadly know that that's a thing that exists. And there was some focus on electric vehicles, some focus on pharmaceuticals, some focus on semiconductors, all of which is like kind of useful. And people are like, okay, well, the government needs to do some stuff, which is useful, but it's not it's not that what people they want to build out our supply chains, they want to do good. What they don't want to do is they don't want to take on the concentrated centers of power that want to crush our supply chains, because another way of talking about a monopoly is it's a pooling of risk in production, right? There's 15 factories around the country that do something. I'm going to be a private equity guy that's going to consolidate them all, shut down half of them, and raise prices. Well, if you want to build out reliant, resilient supply chains, you got to break that guy's power because he
Yeah.
makes money from having one factory or one toll booth. And so it's like people are like, maybe we can give that guy money to make more factories. But it's like, no, you have to break his power because he'll take the money, pocket it. And it's the same thing you see with the Pentagon. So that understanding that the issue is monopolization, that the issue is you can't just do good. You have to fight bad. That hasn't yet penetrated on this. So I see learning going on, and maybe the next crisis won't be so bad, but we'll learn from it. Or maybe we'll start addressing these problems before a next crisis happens. Or maybe there will be a crisis and it will be absolutely horrible, and who knows what happens then. But I mean, we are not in a stable equilibrium. I know it's going to go in different directions.
Okay. Well, we're coming up on the stop that you gave us. Yeah. This was great, man. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks so much. Really enjoyed it.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. If you liked what you heard, please follow the podcast and share with your friends, and even consider going to the support the show link in the episode description. Thank you, and I'll see you all next time.